It started now.
Hello, everybody. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you're joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post questions for our guest. A quick greeting to our viewers in Ukraine by Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Все буде Україна. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Dr. Shrey. It is my honor today to introduce Dr. Sergei Mosyakin, joining us directly from Kyiv. We always appreciate people directly joining Ukraine from Ukraine, and moreover, I appreciate a fellow biologist. Dr. Mosyakin is president of Ukrainian Botanical Society, director of Kholodny Institute of Botany of National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and corresponding member of this academy. He kindly agreed to talk to us today about the ecocide and biodiversity losses, some environmental aspects of the war in Ukraine. I give microphone to Dr. Mosyakin now. The rest of us, please turn off your cameras and microphones, not to create the background. Put your questions in chat, and feel free after the presentation to join the discussion. Welcome, Dr. Mosyakin from Kyiv.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm really honored to be here with you, with all the colleagues and friends. And I see there are some familiar names, and I hope you will enjoy this talk. I really appreciate also this recommendation by Professor Fett and, of course, Dr. Raven, Peter Raven, whom I first met many years ago in 1993, when I first came to the Missouri Botanical Garden to participate in the Flora of North America project, and then it was the Flora of China project. So I had an opportunity to do some research and to prepare some treatments of some complicated groups, mostly of Eurasian origin. And first of all, I'm sorry my English is a little bit rusty because I spent recent years here in Kyiv and in some other places of Ukraine, but very close to Kyiv. But in any case, now I can share my presentation. Victor, is it possible for people to see that, or should I again click that?
Click that. We see your screen, but not these slides yet.
Aha, slides. Okay.
Yes, open please your PowerPoint, and we will see it. Yes.
So there was some glitch as far as I understand, but we will try to mend this. Okay, so
we see it now.
Okay, and I will just make it visible in the slide panel. Unfortunately, I will not be able to show you like in demonstration of all slides. It will be like that. So I will be talking today about the ecocide and biodiversity losses, about only some environmental aspects of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Why some? Because this event is really huge. In fact, any war and any military activities, they have real huge environmental costs and consequences, but the Russian aggression against Ukraine by its scope is simply incomparable to any other military conflict in Europe since the Second World War. So, and by all indicators, this war in Ukraine, it approaches the total war. But at that stage, fortunately, without weapons of mass destruction. And definitely because of that, the environmental cost of this war for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the whole world will be tremendous, immense, and it will be studied by the generations of scientists, I think, as well as, for example, the outcomes of the Chernobyl catastrophe. They're studied, and even now, and we have at our institute, we have some links with researchers who are working in Chernobyl. And you know, by the way, that Chernobyl was occupied at the first stage of the full-scale war. Okay, so because of this huge problem with environmental problems, I will not be able to cover various aspects. For example, I will not touch in my presentation such issues as chemical pollution, for example. You may understand that, for example, when the rockets and missiles hit drones, hit some oil refineries or gas station or whatever, there is a huge pollution, chemical pollution as well, and also huge chemical pollution where the whole cities are destroyed by the artillery fire, by any other military activities. But I will not touch those aspects. I will mostly concentrate, we will mostly discuss the aspects which are directly related to biodiversity. And I think that the most important thing which I would present is just share with you some sources of information, reliable sources of information. And if you or some other people would like to get more data about this environmental disaster, the huge environmental disaster of the war, it will be possible to get this information. And let's start with some reliable links. For example, there was a booklet or small book with many pictures and many figures and data about the environmental impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. And you can see, for example, one of the pages, the title page of this report. And I also provided here the link to the whole report of that. So that's the official sources of information which was prepared by the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine, with many partners like Ukrainian agricultural partners and industrial companies, and with international colleagues and so on. Also, we had some special parliamentary hearings at the Verkhovna Rada, at the Ukrainian Parliament, in November, and there is materials, acts, reports are also available online. Some reports are available in Ukrainian, but a lot of information is also available in English. And I would like also to share with you a special work group, which is called Ukraine War Environmental Consequences War Group. And this information is available in English, in Ukrainian, and even in Russian, because there are some Russians also, they participate in this project. And you can find on that website almost all basic information which is necessary to know about this real environmental catastrophe. Another important source of information is the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group. You see the web page of this group, and they also provide a lot of information. And Nastya Drapaluk shared with me some of the presentations prepared by the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group and their partners. For example, how this war in Ukraine affected the Ukrainian protected areas. And by the way, many protected areas of Ukraine were directly hit by this war. So some of those protected areas, nature reserves and any other categories, national nature parks, they are currently under occupation. And of course, nobody cares. I mean, the Russian occupational forces and Russian occupational administration, they don't care about nature, about other issues related to ecology, to environmental problems, and so on. And for example, in this very interesting presentation, which has been done in July 2023, the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group with European partners, they provided information about some protected areas which were directly affected by the hostilities and the Russian aggression. For example, Svety Gory National Nature Park, which is located in the Donetsk region, Donetsk Oblast, and Svety Gory, it means in Ukrainian holy mountains. And in fact, this national nature park, it contains lots of unique vegetation plots, vegetation units, and localities and populations of protected species, which are included in the Red Dead, the Book of Ukraine, and the chalk outcrops, which also house the unique flora. And unfortunately, the territory of the Svety Gory National Nature Park was directly, it was in fact the battlefield with the trenches, with the shells and the intense shellings and so on and so on. And because of that, many forested areas and many other areas, and especially steppe, they were affected by these hostilities. Here you see that some of the outcomes, some of the consequences of those military activities directly in the territory of the Svety Gory National Nature Park. And it's important also to emphasize that we have now and we will have for the future a huge problem with mines, with shells, which have not exploded, and so demining of the territory will be just a tremendous task. And I believe that Ukraine can be compared only to Cambodia, Kampuchea, or Cambodia, or some other countries with very heavy mining. And especially now in the southern areas of Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces are now trying to break the defense lines of Russian troops. The Russian troops just planted a lot of mines in the steppe areas, in the remaining steppe plots, including the protected areas. So another example is the Kamenska Sich National Nature Park, and the friends from our institute and our colleagues from the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group and Kherson University. You know, Kherson was occupied by Russian troops, but then liberated. It's located on the right bank of the Dnipro River. But after the explosion, after the demolition, intentional demolition of the Kakhovka Dam, I will be talking about that also, the huge areas of this Kamenska Sich National Nature Park, especially near the river, they now look like that, like the desert. And another example is the famous Askania Nova Biosphere Reserve. That's a unique complex which contains, first of all, the virgin steppe, the really unique areas of virgin steppe, with several endemic species which are restricted only to this area, and also a huge kind of open-air zoo with many exotic animals, because it was established, this famous reserve was established by Falsfein, the entrepreneur and scientist of German origin, and it also contains a very nice botanical garden or dendrological park, and it is off. Now I have to restore this document because something happened with that. Just a moment. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm using a different computer which has some strange software, and because of
You're
that.
fine. You're fine now.
I know. So sometimes I will be doing that. So I was talking about Askania Nova. Now Askania Nova is under occupation, and many people who cared about the reserve and in fact tried to save those animals and tried to save the virgin steppe. So they evacuated, they moved to the mainland Ukraine, the not occupied areas, And there was information from people who remained there in Skania Nova that many animals have been killed, and some animals also suffered from starvation. So those are just several examples of the damage which was inflicted to the unique protected areas of Ukraine. And unfortunately, we have very little information about the protected areas which are located in the occupied areas. And another very interesting example, you know that the Snake Island, Zmiyny, Ostriv Zmiyny, you know that story about the Russian warship, and you see the two post stamps of Ukraine and this cruiser Moskva, you know, it's now on the bottom of the Black Sea. But the Snake Island was also a very interesting area from the point of view of its biodiversity. You see that there was a special book, in fact, several books about plants and animals, and also the history of this unique small rock which is located in the Black Sea, which usually have very few islands. And now there was a research done by Alexei Vasilyuk and his colleagues. You see the picture of the Snake Island as it used to be, and now you see almost all facilities, buildings, and everything, they are destroyed. First of all, they were destroyed by Russian troops, and then Ukrainian counterattacked this area, and you see, for example, the results of the Ukrainian strikes with missiles and drones. And now we may just say that this island is totally different from what it used to be. And of course, we cannot just live without mentioning one of the greatest environmental catastrophes of this century and in Europe, which is comparable to Chernobyl or to some other huge environmental catastrophe, that's the Kakhovka Dam disaster. For me, for example, this doggy, the German Shepherd, which was saved, and you see that the dog just hugs the man who saved her, that's the she-dog. And for me, it's just a symbol of this disaster, of many personal catastrophes or many personal disasters for people. For example, I talked not so long ago with my friends and colleagues from Kherson, and they used to have dacha, some summer houses on the left bank of the Dnipro River. And when I asked them what happened to those areas when they had those summer houses, they said that the summer houses were underwater up to the roofs. So in fact, huge areas were destroyed, and you see this poster, Stop Ecocide Ukraine, about the Kakhovka Dam disaster. So this water, it looks like blood, and that's true. And what is interesting, already in October 2022, two our colleagues, Alexei Vasilyuk and Evgeny Simonov, they prepared a special publication by this Ukrainian war environmental consequences war group, and they discussed the issue of hydroelectric dams and weapons, virtual and actual. They mentioned also the dam breach of the Dnipro hydropower plant during the Second World War. It was destroyed by the Soviets in order to stop or just to slow down the German advance across the Dnieper. But in fact, thousands and probably dozens of thousands of innocent people were killed in this huge disaster on the Dnipro River. And what happened now is just the continuation of just almost the same deja vu of those crimes which were done by the Stalinist regime. And you see that even the Russian social media circulated a video simulating flooding of the Kakhovka Dam. And that's exactly what happened. So we have from our Ministry of Environmental Protection and some other sources, we have information about this disaster. The wave of about 5 meters with filling width of 5 kilometers across the river with about 25 kilometers per hour wave speed for with the uninterrupted rise of the water level for 14 hours and duration of flooding, they said 3 days, but in fact it was more, 5 days, and only after that in some areas the water went down. So this infographics information is available, and already on the day of this disaster I prepared a message, kind of message, which I sent to many people, including Peter Raven and some other colleagues, and it was about some environmental aspects of the Kakhovka Dam disaster. And those were just preliminary comments, but in fact everything went through. So large-scale flooding of the downstream areas of the Kherson and Mykolaiv region, and was of course a direct danger to people, wildlife, ecosystems, and of course water pollution, and exposure of some upstream areas that formerly were underwater. And of course, it was also huge consequences for people and the environment, including water supply, sewage, and many energy supply for many areas upstream. And also, it created obstacles and problems for counteroffensive and planned advances of Ukrainian troops. So it created a huge power and water supply problems for huge regions of the southern part of Ukraine. And it also created the problems for the cooling reservoir, so the cooling pool of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, which power plant, which is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it's currently controlled by the aggressor. And in fact, they converted the area of this nuclear facility into a military base. Of course, there are and will be huge economic losses for Ukraine, both direct losses and indirect losses. And of course, large-scale environmental disasters and huge disruption of the ecosystems of the lower Dnipro River. In fact, several protected areas and nature conservation units were severely affected with their vegetation, wildlife, and whole ecosystems. First of all, that's the Black Sea Biosphere Reserve. By the way, some people who I know and our colleagues, they were unable to move from this area, and they experienced that disaster, including the whole Pristan town, which was almost completely flooded, and that's the town which in which the administration of the Black Sea Biosphere Reserve is located. And Oleshki Sand National Nature Park. By the way, there are some links to the Wikipedia articles in which you can get some information about those amazing areas of Ukrainian nature. And some other protected areas, they were directly affected by this flooding. And this flooding also affected some rare, endemic, endangered species of animals and plants. Just a few examples. Probably you never heard about this animal, sandy blind mole rat. It's not a mole, it's not a rat, it's a rodent of the genus Spalax. And this species is definitely an endemic species of the lower Dnipro sands. And by the way, it's included into the data book of Ukraine. We have a Ukrainian coin, by the way, with this animal. Here you see the total range, the total area occupied by this animal, the sands along the left bank of the Dnipro River. And how many animals do you have in this area? Between 15 and 20,000 mature individuals. They live in underground environment. And they all occur in these small areas, endemic species. Why this species is so important? Some people would say, seeing all those tragedies and death of many people, destruction of property and destruction of the infrastructure of Ukraine, should we care about those animals? Yes, we should, and I will explain why. Because Spalax is a really important, because it's a perfect model of evolution in action. And you see in the journal Science, blind mole rats show evolution is action. Also, the studies of the genome and physiology of those animals may contribute, and already contributed, to our understanding of very important mechanisms of stress adaptation and resistance to cancer. And this group of animals, the genus Spalax, was studied by Eviatar Nevo, a great friend of our institute, who is the founder of the Institute of Evolution at the University of Haifa in Israel, and of course his research partners. And the publications about those little animals, they are present in Nature, in Science, in the best journals in the world. And you see the BBC News, cancer-resistant blind mole rat gets genome sequence. And here you see this article published in the Nature Communications, Nature journal. So, because speciation of this group was very active, was very, I would say, really a model group for seeing this evolution and speciation and evolution in action, every species of this mole rat, of this genus Spalax, is important. And definitely we will have at least huge decline of the populations of these animals, because the areas were flooded, and definitely now the population, it will be very difficult to see the restoration of this population of those animals. Some other examples also. You may find some other examples also in the web from the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, also in my publications, and also our friends and colleagues, including academician, member of the National Academy, Yakov Diduch, and our colleagues from the Kherson University, Yevgeny Khodosovtsev, and Ivan Moiseyenko, and some other people. They visited this Kamenska Sich, which I have already mentioned. Here you see the areas from which water just came from. And you see that those are quite tall trees. There was a picture, and the person was staying here, so the person was not taller than those trees. You see that the twigs of those, trunks of those trees, dead trees of course, they are covered with Dreissena and some other mollusks. So the water completely covered all those dead trees. So the water drop was about 13 meters. I don't know how much it's in feet, but you can figure out. So also endemic and subendemic plant species. Subendemic, it means almost endemic. This lower Dnipro area is also critically important for several narrowly endemic species of plants. We have in the southern part of Ukraine a beautiful swarm of species which are called the pearl knapweeds. That's the genus Centaurea, Centaurea breviceps, Centaurea pachowski. Those are also species of plants which also show the evolution, microevolution in action. And they are really amazing. Also, they're beautiful, and they can be cultivated as ornamental plants. And populations of those species in these areas also were affected by this flood. But before that, they were affected by fires, which were caused by military activities, shelling, and now they are probably also affected by this flood. Also, there are many vulnerable species of plants and animals, including dozens of those listed in the Red Data Book of Ukraine, and also threatened, endangered, and rare plant communities, including those listed in the Green Data Book of Ukraine. And I have to explain that the Green Data Book of Ukraine is, in fact, it was the first Green Data book in the world many years ago, the first edition. And in the 1980s, it was the conception of this idea. And this book, similar in the Red Data book, we have species of plants, animals, and fungi. But in the Green Data book, which is also an official document in Ukraine, we have the rare endangered plant communities. And also many habitats will be changed, including those habitats which are protected at the European level. Unfortunately, now we have very little first-hand information because there is no access for scientists to those areas, but some assessments has been made already using the available information. Here you see Centaurea breviceps, one of those pearl knapweeds, and this information was prepared by Alexei Vasilyuk, the young researcher who is very active in nature conservation from the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, and also the Institute of Zoology, Schmalhausen Institute of Zoology of the National Academy of Sciences. And here you see the map. You see the yellow dots. Those are probably unaffected populations of Centaurea breviceps. And you see the red crosses. And the red crosses, those are known populations which were affected by steppe fires. You see, with almost equal number of habitats. But now, that's for sure, those habitats in the Kinburn and some other areas, they were flooded during this destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. So in addition to huge human tragedies, we also have many events and many consequences affecting the nature world. As I said, some people may say it's not so important if compared to the human tragedies. Everything is important in the human tragedies, and also it's important to preserve our heritage, our natural heritage. And of course, despite all problems, Ukrainian scientists, they continue their work in monitoring and researching what's happening with our nature, especially in the areas which were liberated, like the Chernobyl Biosphere Reserve, Radiation Biosphere Reserve, which is officially called. You know, the Chernobyl was occupied, and the Russian troops, they even made some field fortifications and dig dark trenches in the exclusion zone, including now some areas, including the zone which was the area of the former Red Forest. The forest which was just killed, in fact, by radiation. And when we visited Chernobyl in just 1 year before the large-scale war, in September 2021, we wanted to collect some plants in this area of the Red Forest, Veronica. And the people from the reserve, they said, oh, it's a bad idea. We should better move from this area with our cars. So because it's prohibited to stay here and even to sample some plants. Well, those idiots stayed there and dug trenches. And of course, the exposure to radiation, just the outside radiation, was probably not so dangerous. But what is important is just to inhaling the so-called hot particles. So all this dust with the remnants of fuel. And I believe that many Russian soldiers, they got some hot particles in their lungs. And of course, the area of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the exclusion zone, the so-called 30 kilometers exclusion zones, it was affected by forest fires because it was impossible for firefighters to work in this area because of the occupation. Here you see also one of the examples, an article published by professor, member of the National Academy, my colleague from our institute, Yakov Diduch, published in the Вісник Національної академії наук України, the transactions of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, about the ecosystem approach to assessing the impact of threats and losses caused by military action. Because now it's also important to figure out how much it costs, even not only in ecosystem services, but how much it costs just in money. All those threats and all those losses which we suffered because of this war. And that's the approach which Professor Diduch is trying to develop. Some other recent publication about the synanthropization of the vegetation cover of vegetation of Ukraine because of the war. On some previous slides, you saw the areas which were almost completely covered with the craters from shells and missiles, and also disturbance by tracks of cars and tanks and some heavy equipment, trenches and so on. And now also the huge areas which are without water upstream of the Kakhovka Dam. And such habitats are perfect for weedy species, including invasive alien species. We also expect that some so-called polemohores, so polemos, the war in Greek, and horos, to bring, so plant species which were brought as alien species from some areas with equipment, with supplies, with transportation and so on. And because after each war, and especially in earlier times when people during the war used horses and also some hay and also some feed for horses, for livestock. In those times, we had many invasive alien species brought to Ukraine as well as to other European countries. So we expect also the outbursts of many alien invasive species, including those species which are dangerous for human health, like Ambrosia artemisifolia, like Heracleum, giant hogweed, and some other species. And there are already some publications available. And also there are some publications with rather unexpected things. For example, this one, I was really surprised to see this publication from Anton Vlaschenko and many of his colleagues, because you see the title, "The war-damaged urban environment becomes deadly trap for bats. Case for Kharkiv." You know, Kharkiv, especially some areas in Kharkiv, Saltovka and so on, they were heavily bombed and shelled by the Russian occupation troops, and it happened that also it was dangerous not only for human beings but also for bats, and they explain why it was so important and why it was so dangerous. And also a recent research of one entomologist and one botanist, they studied the trees and the behavior of ants in Bucha and Irpin. Definitely you know that Bucha is one of the suburbs of Kyiv, and that was Bucha massacre. In Irpin also it was massacre of civilians and also heavy shelling during this the initial stage of war, when orcs tried to get Kyiv from the north and from the west. And our colleagues studied the behavior of ants and preferences of ants, and it happened that the war even affected those insects. For me, it was amazing, amazing results. And definitely, the activities and military attacks of the Russian occupational troops, they also damaged many research institutions of the Ukrainian Academy, including some research institutions like the National Collection of Seeds in Kharkiv. Also, the Kharkiv University, you know that it suffered after the bomb strikes and the bombs and missiles. And even our institute, in which I'm staying right now, it was damaged by the nearby missile strikes. Two missiles in 10th of October 2022 came to the central part of the city. And if you want, you can just read more about this. Several people were killed in their cars because one of those missiles, it came to the intersection of two large streets, and the shock waves also damaged some roofs and and lots of windows in our institute, as you may see. For example, here in this slide, you may see also the historical Schmalhausen and Rogovich herbarium, those like books. Those are not books, those are in fact historical herbarium collections of Professor Ivan Fedorovich Schmalhausen, Johann Friedrich Schmalhausen. And fortunately, we were able to repair most of this damage. But a couple of 100 meters just to the north, and it might have been the destruction of the National Herbarium of Ukraine, with more than 2 million specimens representing flora and of all continents and historical collections from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Fortunately, this time we were lucky. Replacing some windows and repairing roof was not a very big problem as compared, for example, to Kharkiv herbarium and some problems with the Kherson herbarium. Fortunately, the occupants didn't, they looted a lot of museums in Kherson when they retreated from the Kherson area, and that was also in the news everywhere. But mostly they were interested in historical collections, some artifacts and arts and things like that. So they were not much interested in herbaria, fortunately. Okay, so that's just some glimpses of environmental problems which emerged and developed during this absolutely crazy from the side of the Russian war. And definitely we will continue our work, and we will definitely, I'm sure that Ukraine will overcome, and as we wrote in one that published in one of our articles, Ukraine will, it was in Ukrainian, Ukraine will mend this damage, repair this damage, and our beautiful nature will, with its powers of restoration, restore its beauty and richness. Also, at the end of my presentation, as far as I understand, I used a lot of time. Yes, Victor? Yeah? Okay.
It's fine.
I would like to recommend some selected resources. By the way, I sent a PDF version of my presentation also to Victor. And if it's problematic to use the main presentation, there's like PowerPoint presentation in the PowerPoint format. It would be probably possible to use the PDF, which is about 3 megabytes. So selected resources, which I used, which you can also use the official information from the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. Of course, the official information and publications from the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And I should say that many institutions, many institutes of the National Academy of Sciences, they engaged in assessment and studies of environmental consequences of this war, including our Institute of Botany, the nearby Institute of Zoology. A very important work has been done, and they're continuing this work at the Institute of Hydrobiology and the Institute of Evolutionary Ecology and Botanical Gardens. They're all doing a good job and trying to make assessments what's happening, because of course it's tragic, but it's, at the same time it's important from the point of view of science, like a Chernobyl accident, which I also observed, because my PhD dissertation was flora of the Kyiv Polessia area. That's exactly the area of the Chernobyl. And I visited Chernobyl next year after the catastrophe, and some other times. So it's tragic, but it's also an opportunity to get new information about the self-restoration of the forces of nature. And fortunately, I hope that when the war is over, of course with the victory of Ukraine, we'll have many interesting publications, and Ukrainian nature will restore itself. And of course, I recommend also the information from the Ukraine War Environmental Consequences War Group. There is the link, and Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, and many other resources which are easily available with just several keywords using any search engines. And I would like to express my sincere gratitude to many, many people, because I used, just as I mentioned, it's not the complete picture. Those are just some glimpses to give you them first-hand experience what's going on with the nature of Ukraine. And more information is available from the sources which I mentioned. I would like to express my gratitude to Victor Fett, to Peter Raven, through him we communicated with Victor, and to my colleagues here in Ukraine, Yakov Didukh, the previous director of Kholodny Institute of Botany, member of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, professor and an excellent ecologist, to Anastasia Nastya Drapaluk from the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, who provided some slides. I mentioned that at the very beginning of this presentation, 4 slides. To Alexei Vasilyuk from Shmalgausen Institute of Zoology of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, and many other people from the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine and from Kherson University and some other places and so on. And definitely, I would like to express my gratitude to whom? To the armed forces of Ukraine. And due to the heroic resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine and the volunteers and many, many people who work for our victory, just because of their sacrifice, because of their heroic resistance, I have this opportunity to sit here in the center of Kyiv at the Institute of Botany and talk to you. So thanks to the armed forces of Ukraine, to our soldiers. And I would like to finish this, to complete this presentation with this picture. I thank you for your attention, and take a look at that. That's the mural in Kyiv, which is, it was painted in 2014, when the war just began. The annexation of Crimea, the military activities in Donbass, and this is called Time for Change. You see here the Ukrainian Cossack, which is also, you see, like one of Hindu deities with many hands. And also you see the snake with the head of Putin with the arrow. You see the monkey with the assault rifle with the words to Kyiv. And you see this mural, as it looks like in Kyiv. When you, I hope you will visit Kyiv someday after the war, after our victory, and you will see this mural and many other beautiful places, because that's a really beautiful city. And I'm happy to be born here. I'm happy to stay here in this city during all the days of this war. And this city is eternal, an eternal city. It will live, and the forces of evil, I hope, will disappear soon. Thank you so much for your attention. And that's all. Okay, thank you. Victor?
Thank you, Dr. Mosyakin.
So
Thank you.
probably
Please.
some people have some questions. Should I stop this sharing of my?
Yes.
Okay, I will just do that. Відкликати to stop the sharing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Perfect.
It's
Thank you
good.
so much. I was not able to control my video, so probably my hands or something else was not so good. Thank you so much for your attention. And of course, I apologize for my English. It's a little bit rusty. I spent so much time here in Ukraine during recent years. But that was my duty to stay here because it was impossible just to leave the institute, my family, and okay. Thank you. I will be happy to answer your questions if any. And thanks.
If I could just jump in with a quick reaction. First of all, your English is splendid, absolutely perfect. So just a quick reaction, and then I think we're going to go to Dean Deutsch for our first question. Thank you so much for pointing us to reliable and credible sources. That is so important as we continue to have conversations with our friends and neighbors in the United States. It's so important to be able to point them to reliable, credible sources. Thank you. Thank you also for explaining the importance of caring about the smaller creatures, the blind mole rat, the spalex, that we might otherwise take for granted. This is really important. And you're right, sometimes we get questions. It's such a human tragedy. Why should we care about the ants? Why should we care about the bats? Why should we care about the moles? But the ant, there are really serious and important answers for that. And thank you so much for using your background to help us understand and appreciate that, pointing us to things like the invasive species that are happening, things that we don't even think about as we experience through the news about the daily horrors of the war. It puts Putin's war on Ukraine, the impact of it, on a whole other level. So I just want to start by saying thank you for your beautifully presented, clear, well-documented presentation. And thank you for ending on such a note of hope that Ukraine's land is resilient as her people. And very дуже вам дякую. I'm going to invite Dean Deutsch. Dean Leonard Deutsch is a close friend of our program. He's a former dean at Marshall University, and he is a very strong supporter of the people affected by the horrors in Ukraine. Dean Deutsch, the floor is yours.
Sergei, in your initial comments about the environmental consequences work group, did I hear you say that there are Russian members too? And if so, are these expatriates? Are these people in Russia? Do they have the approval of the Russian government?
No way. Definitely. You know, we, in fact, we don't have any direct collaboration with Russians. And it's not because of some prohibition or so on. Because, for example, for me, I will not have contacts, even scientific contacts, with Russian colleagues. And what is amazing, well, I can explain why it happened. I mentioned Kherson. You know, that's a city in the southern part of Ukraine. And Kherson was occupied at the initial stage of this war. But before the occupation of Kherson, one university, he participated in some Russian Botanical Society community by email. some news or whatever, sharing publications. And at the beginning of this war, during the first or the second or the third day of this war, he sent a message to this community of Russian botanists saying, guys, protest, what's going on? Try to stop this. So what do you think? What was the reaction? One part of this community, they were totally silent. And some other part of that community, well, for example, one guy from Moscow, from Botanical Garden in Moscow, sent a message to this person, Ivan from Kherson. Ivan, we are not silent. We support our army. We support our president. You will soon be liberated. Everything will be fine. And he signed, well, in his name, there is a Russian letter Z. He signed like, instead of Z, with the big letter Z. And several other guys came to this email exchange and using Russian swear words, expressed their opinion. One person, because I was also in this community, I sent a message to Ivan, to our person from Kherson, and one person from Moscow sent me a personal email and said, Professor Mosyakin, not all of us so crazy as this guy and that guy, but those who are not so crazy, they're silent. And as I expressed that, when I reacted to this situation, I sent the message to my colleague from Kherson and to some other people from Ukraine, of course, and said, don't try to communicate with them. It's silly now. Those people who are against us, they're just crazy. Like Nazis during the Second World War. They're just poisoned with the propaganda. And some other people, they're scared, they're shy. So the jackals, scavengers like hyenas from one side, and meek sheep from other sides. There is no use to talk to sheep and to hyenas. So that was my message with that. But not all, of course, not all our Russian colleagues like that. Those who participate in this group, as you mentioned, those are expats. They are not living in Russia. And one of the persons, Evgeny, he is officially designated as a foreign agent by the Russian government or Ministry of Justice or Justice, I mean, like that, in parentheses. So only those people who emigrated and who directly and openly expressed their support of Ukraine. Only those people. I'm sorry for my emotional reaction, but I just wanted to show you this, how it looks like. And by the way, there is 1.5 years of the war. During that period, I had only 4 or 5 messages from former colleagues from Russia. Well, I understand many of them are scared, but it's not an excuse for me. So some people are probably also scared to stay like in Ukraine, in Kyiv, under shells and bombs and missiles and so on. That's a different kind of scare, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mosyakin. Do we have more questions from our viewers? I see Anara with hand raised. Please, Anara.
Thank you very much for your remarkable presentation. And I believe that you and your colleagues are the true heroes. I think that
our army. We're just doing what we should do here. We are not heroes.
But you are heroes for us, for scholars. We should learn from you. And both Russian and Ukrainian forces, they both use anti-tank, anti-vehicle, anti-personnel mines. And today, Ukraine is the most mined country. And many landmines casualties are not reported. And even corpses of people and animals can kill today. So I have a question. What could be done to address this issue, and how international community can help Ukraine in this matter? Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, the international community and the Ukrainian government, they already, is it okay with translation? So they already respond. For example, several, is it communication okay?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay.
Yes.
Because something happened with the image. So first of all, the government and also some big companies, they are engaged in so-called humanitarian demining, if my translation is okay, especially for agricultural areas. I wanted even to show you some pictures because this year I visited, of course, forests near Kyiv, but in fact it's prohibited to visit the forests near Kyiv, especially in the northwestern area, Irpin, Bucha, Romanovka, some other areas, because there are still some shells, unexploded shells, and of course some mines and so on. And definitely you mentioned that the both sides use mines. The use of mines by Ukrainian side, as far as I understand, is mostly restricted to some military areas and some areas which were complicated for, like in the Donbass, where the front line is very stable. In this case, they know what's going on and where those minefields are located. But what the Russian, so it cannot be compared to the mining by Ukrainian troops and Russian troops, especially now when Ukrainian troops are advancing in the south. So they have this huge problem with demining, with the removal of those mines which are on the front, just the obstacles to Ukrainian advancing troops. But that's a task for the future, definitely. Because I believe that now, of course, with this humanitarian demining, first of all, agricultural lands, areas near towns and cities and villages and main roads and so on. So that's going on right now. But for the future, huge areas we will need for decades, we will need the activities for demining. And of course, it's also a big problem for the environment. You mentioned that some animals, some people and some animals and vehicles, they're being destroyed, and sometimes people don't even have idea what's going on in some areas, especially at remote areas. Frankly speaking, I wanted to show you some greasy, some really bad pictures, but I decided not to do that, including also, that's a big problem because the corpses of humans and animals are also, excuse me please, but that's the source of biological and chemical pollution also, and the bacteriological danger to the local population, and by the way also to the animals as well. You know that canine animals and feline animals in some areas, they are used to this kind of food, and that's really tragic. Sorry about sharing with you, but that's
no,
true.
that's thank you.
We can find this also in our news.
Thank you very thank you very much.
Thank you, Anara. We will take more questions from the visitors, from the viewers, please. I see guests which with names I don't even know. You don't have to ask questions. You may remain silent, but please, someone, you can also put your question in the chat. Meanwhile, let me just from myself thank Dr. Mosyakin once again, because I hear a lot of familiar places and names, not the least is a blind mole rat, because it was studied by everyone for decades. It's kind of very famous poster animal and symbol, enough to say that we teach about spalax in our biogeography and evolution classes, of course. And I have been working with friends from Ukrainian National Academy of Sciences way before the Ukrainian independence for decades and decades. I'm very proud to support them professionally, and actually many of them, I hope, will watch this in recording in different countries and in Ukraine as well. Any more questions, please, to Dr. Mosyakin? We're over the hour, but we can stay for questions. We don't have to go immediately. We
I
don't
see
have.
some familiar names also.
Yes. I'm calling for people to open their microphones and don't be shy. I need also to tell, because we are in an academic environment right now, I'm asked often for the last months, do you have other platforms like this in American universities, like ours? I have not looked in detail, but I don't know. I hate to think we are the only ones. I'm sure there are specialized seminars, periodic programs, and something beyond news outlets, which systematically invites speakers on Ukraine, from Ukraine. And we are very glad to share our expertise and our speakers and network. It is something which modern technology allowed us to do, and we are very proud to help and contribute in this sense. We have Leo Rudnitsky here. Leonid Ivanovich, do you want to say a couple of words to us? Open your microphone then, and we will, your microphone is not opened. And there is a colleague in chat, Leila Schultz, a colleague from Utah, who wanted to thank Dr. Mosyakin for his information about specific organisms. She says, you continue to make a great impact. I do not have a microphone or camera on my computer, and I only sent my written comment. This is Professor Emerita Leila Schultz from Utah State University in the United States. Thank you very much, Professor Schultz. And
Leila, I'm glad that you are here with us, because we published some articles together with Leila about Artemisia of North America, and we met during our work on the Flora of North America project. Leila, stay safe, stay healthy, everything the best to you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's amazing to me that in the course of and Victor, this is our 73rd, 72nd show at this point. We're pretty far along, right? The conversation has gone into many various different areas, including the impact on biodiversity. We had a program a couple months ago, on the impact of the war on dolphins in the Black Sea and the tragic results there. So I really do appreciate this extra dimension. There is so much to talk about. I'm amazed how much ground you covered. I'm curious about the ants. You said that even the ants in Ukraine behave differently. I mean, this is amazing. This implies the extent of the horror of war, that to even affect an organism that tiny is just mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. Just thank you. I'm just very grateful. I know that we had a couple other viewers chime in. Please feel free to ask questions, and you're welcome to, but I think we are close to wrapping up our time together.
And I also see, somebody else wanted to say something.
I thought so too, but
I also see Linda Astri here, Linda from the Missouri Botanical Garden, Peter Raven Library, and it by email, and Linda helped me with publication. So I'm really grateful to you and to all of you, of course, because it's very important to see and to feel this support. And I understand that the news, the Ukraine is going out of news.
Yes.
And it's not so dramatic, so tragic, probably for many people outside of Ukraine. But what I would like to say that it's not just about Ukraine. It's about the law and order and the future of not only Europe but probably civilization. If you can grab a part of the different country, if you can do some real atrocities, like in Bucha, in Irpin, if you can destroy the environment because of military tasks and actions like this Kakhovka Dam, if you can just annex, first of all, Crimea, and then Donetsk and Lugansk, and then an absolutely moronic move, Zaporizhia, and Kherson areas, which they don't even control. And they say now they will have elections, local elections there. So it's just mind blowing. It's crazy. If it's possible, then everything else will be possible. And all dictators in all parts of the world, they will say, "Lah, civilization is weak. We can do whatever we want." And they will be happy with this. Dictators and some other non-democratic countries. So it's about law and order and, something like higher justice. So that's the word for higher justice. You cannot do that, what you are trying to do. You cannot lie like you are lying. You cannot make those atrocities. Or if you make that, you will have some response. I understand that probably for many people in many countries of the world, the resistance of Ukraine at the very beginning of this war was some big surprise. I had messages during the first days of the war from one of my friends from Ukraine, but now he's working in the United States, Dr. Mosyakin, just leave Kyiv 2 more weeks and your city will be grabbed and will be occupied. I said, it will never happen. I was staying alone in Kyiv. I went to my balcony. From my window, I observed some missiles coming to the television center and to one of the industrial facilities and so on. And I heard the noise, all this noise, the sounds of war from the northwestern part of the city. But I have had because I walked because there was no public transportation and it was very complicated to use any kind of transportation. So I walked to the institute. It's about 1 hour walk, and I saw those people who were staying here almost at every crossroad, from territorial defense, volunteers, and so on. And I was sure that the orcs will never take this Minas Tirith or Kyiv. So I was sure for some reason. Kyiv is about 600 or something like that square kilometers. It's a big city with many parks and squares and buildings and so on. So probably it was absolutely irrational, but I was sure that they will never take Kyiv. By the way, I mentioned that in one of my preprints on the ResearchGate when I translated into English some sonnets of Ukrainian poet Zerov about Kyiv. So, and that was true. So sometimes we should trust our feelings. So as many years ago, addressing Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, Winston Churchill said, "Give us the tools and we will finish the job." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mosyakin. This is beautifully said, and the world needs to hear it every day. And we're very glad to help to convey your words directly from the wartime Kyiv. That's why we started this network, this podcast, because we wanted simply to record people's words and feelings over these 18 months, and we do not plan to stop. And we definitely will welcome you and your colleagues again here to talk to us for as long as you need us. Here is Nancy saying, thank you, Sergei, you're an inspiration for all of us.
Nancy Moore,
in chat.
probably.
Nancy, I don't know if you know each other.
Probably, yes. Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you.
Nancy Morin, yes.
Excellent, Nancy. I'm so happy. So send me an email. Thank you so much. So nice to see the presence of people whom I met during my earlier visits to the United States. And I'm a little bit ashamed because my language is not so good now.
Amazing.
Little
It is
practice.
amazing.
Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who has questions or comments, please? It was a marvelous presentation and very informative and very passionate. And we are just so glad to provide this platform for you and everyone else who wants to talk. We are watched mostly in recordings, so I'm sure Dr. Raven and the colleagues will be glad to see the recording and disseminate it to their networks. We will put it on our website as soon as it is ready. We will finish our podcast now. You do not have to leave. We will stop recording after final words, and we can chat a little bit more after recording of record. This concludes our 79th weekly podcast on September 1st, the Day of Knowledge, in many parts of the world, including Ukraine. Children go to school today when they can. Many go in bomb shelters, including children in my native city of Kryvyi Rih. Dr. Shrey, please.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня прощаємося. Все буде Україна. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
Дякую.